On a freezing night, a billion-dollar deal is about to change the course of a nation. Everything was planned with precision, but an unseen flaw threatens to bring it all crashing down. A child, in the shadows of power, sees what no one else dared to. With a single word, she exposes the truth and stops a lie from sealing the future. If this story grabbed you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. The museum hall was filled with silence that winter night. Golden lights reflected off the polished marble floor as Ryan Vanderbilt adjusted the cuff of his shirt for the third time in less than 5 minutes. At 52, he had built an empire from scratch after his family lost everything, but tonight was different. Tonight he would finally reclaim what had been stolen from his ancestors centuries ago. Vast lands in the heart of Europe, territories that bore the Vanderbilt name, carved into every ancient stone. The cold air drifting in through the windows carried the scent of dampness and history. Ryan felt the weight of every second. He had grown up listening to his grandfather's stories about the lost lands, about the injustice. He had nurtured an obsessive desire to restore what had been destroyed. The documents were laid out on the oak table in the center of the private room. $200 million. A steep price, but Ryan knew this was worth more than money. It was about justice. It was about restoring the honor of a lineage torn apart by political conspiracies. It was about proving that his entire life of relentless work had a greater purpose. Dr. Margaret Clark, a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and thin-framed glasses, held the main document with excessive delicacy. She was the expert hired to authenticate the Brandenburg Hills Grant Charter, a parchment supposedly dating back to the 11th century. Her fingers touched the paper as if she were holding something sacred. There was something about her posture that bothered Ryan, an over-the-top confidence that bordered on arrogance. Ryan watched her every move intently. He didn't trust anyone easily. Life had taught him that people lie, documents can be altered, and promises are rarely kept. But Dr. Clark had impeccable credentials. Her name appeared in respected academic journals. Her reputation was solid. She had examined the document for 6 months and guaranteed its authenticity with absolute conviction. Across the room, leaning against a cold stone pillar, a little girl watched everything in silence. Sophia was only 4, but her large, dark eyes seemed to absorb every detail around her with an intensity that didn't match her age. She wore a simple, faded blue cotton dress and worn-out sneakers that no longer fit her feet properly, squeezing her toes in a way that hurt, but she had learned not to complain. She was there because her mother, Yasmin, worked as a janitor at the museum and had no one to leave her daughter with that night. Yasmin had begged her supervisor to let her bring Sophia, promising the girl would be quiet, invisible, that no one would even notice her presence. And that was exactly what Sophia did best: be invisible. She had learned early on that the adult world had no room for children like her, too small, too poor, too foreign. So she stayed quiet, watching, learning, keeping everything inside herself just as her mother taught her. But there was something about the scene tonight that held her attention in a different way. Maybe it was the way the man in the dark suit stared at the old paper with such intensity, as if that piece of yellowed parchment contained all the happiness in the world. Or maybe it was the way the silver-haired woman spoke, with complicated words Sophia didn't fully understand, but that sounded false in a way she couldn't explain. It was like when adults lied to children, thinking they wouldn't notice. Sophia always noticed. Sophia's mother, Yasmin, was wiping down the windows at the back of the room with a damp cloth, trying to be discreet. She didn't want to draw attention. Not tonight. But every so often her eyes would find her daughter, making sure she was okay. Yasmin had been a professor of ancient languages in her home country before everything fell apart. Before the political persecution swept through her university like a destructive hurricane. Before she was unjustly accused of forging historical documents by a jealous colleague who couldn't stand to see a younger woman gaining recognition. The accusation was devastating. It didn't matter that it was a lie. It didn't matter that she had proof of her innocence. In the political climate of the time, accusations were sentences. Before she had to flee with her young daughter in her arms, crossing borders in the dead of night, leaving behind the career she had built with so much effort, her reputation that had been her greatest asset, her identity that was now buried under layers of fear and silence. Now she was just another invisible immigrant, cleaning the halls of a museum while trying to give her daughter a decent life. But even exhausted, even broken inside, Yasmin never stopped teaching. Sophia. In the empty nights of their small, cold apartment, she would show her daughter old books she salvaged from the museum's trash, teaching her to recognize ancient letters, to understand that every stroke told a story. Sophia didn't understand why her mother did it, why she spent hours showing her stained manuscripts and torn pages, but she liked it. She liked seeing the spark in her mother's tired eyes when she talked about medieval calligraphy, about how each scribe had a unique way of forming letters, about how you could uncover secrets just by looking closely. At the center table, Dr. Clark began her speech. Her voice was firm, full of an authority that brooked no argument. She explained the document's authenticity with technical terms, pointed to the wax seals, described the chemical analyses of the ink. Ryan listened intently, but his face remained impassive. He wanted to believe. He needed to believe. That document was the key to everything he had pursued for the last 10 years. Ryan's lawyer, Dr. Paul Stevens, a 60-year-old man with deep wrinkles around his eyes, leafed through the contract papers with deliberate slowness. He was cautious by nature, suspicious of deals that seemed too perfect. But even he seemed satisfied with the terms. Everything was in order. Everything seemed legitimate. Sophia crept a little closer to the table, curious. No one noticed. She was good at that. The adults kept talking, pointing at the yellowed parchment. The girl tilted her head. The letters on the document were strange, full of curves. But there was something familiar about them, something her mother had shown her in one of the old books they had at home. Ryan picked up the gold pen that lay on the table, a gift from his father. His fingers trembled slightly. He was about to sign, about to reclaim what was his, about to rewrite his family's history. Dr. Stevens watched everything cautiously. Life had taught him that when something seemed too perfect, it usually hid dangerous imperfections. That's when Sophia saw it. A word. In the middle of those ancient, elaborate letters, lost among Latin phrases she could barely pronounce, was a word she recognized immediately because her mother had taught her, because they had read it together in a book about foods from different eras. Her heart hammered inside her small chest. She looked at her mother, across the room. Yasmin had her back turned, oblivious to everything. Sophia looked at the document again, moving closer. She was absolutely certain of what she had read. That word shouldn't be there. It couldn't be there. It was impossible. And even though she was so small, even though she didn't fully understand what was happening, Sophia knew this meant something was very wrong. The girl took a step forward, then another, her small body moving almost on instinct. One of the security guards, a tall man dressed in black, noticed her movement and made a motion to steer her, away with a firm gesture, but Ryan raised a hand, stopping him. There was something in the boldness of this tiny child, in the quiet determination with which she approached, that piqued his curiosity. Or maybe it was just the instinct of a businessman, always alert to details others ignored. Sophia pointed to the parchment with a tiny finger, still smudged with dust from the floor where she had been playing earlier. Her voice came out low, shaky, but clear enough for everyone to hear in the heavy silence that dominated the room. That word didn't exist. The entire hall seemed to freeze. Ryan frowned, leaning over the table to see what the girl was pointing at, his heart racing without him understanding why. Dr. Clark's mouth fell open, her face suddenly tense. Dr. Stevens approached with quick steps, his legal instincts immediately on high alert. And Yasmin, from across the room, dropped her cleaning cloth on the floor, the sound echoing in the silent night, her face draining of all color as her eyes fixed first on her daughter, then traveled to the silver-haired woman. And in that instant something shifted. It was recognition. It was horror. It was the certainty that the past she had tried to bury had just resurfaced before her very eyes. Ryan leaned further over the table, his eyes scanning the parchment until he found what the girl was pointing at. The word was there, clear as day, written in dark ink on the yellowed paper. Chocolate. He read it again, trying to understand why it was so unsettling. It was just a word. But the way the child had spoken, the certainty in her small voice, made him hesitate. "Explain," he said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "Why didn't that word exist?" Sophia looked at him with those big, serious eyes, a 4-year-old who suddenly seemed to carry knowledge far beyond her years. She swallowed hard before answering, her voice trembling slightly. "My mum taught me. Chocolate came from far away, from lands on the other side of the ocean. People here didn't know about chocolate back then, not until a long, long time later." Dr. Clark let out a forced laugh, adjusting her glasses on her nose with a nervous gesture she tried to disguise as disdain. "This is ridiculous. A child has no standing to question the authenticity. So have a historical document of this magnitude. Mr. Vanderbilt, please, let's not allow a childish interruption to disrupt such an important transaction." But Ryan wasn't listening. His brain was already processing the information, connecting the dots. He had studied European history for years, preparing for this moment. Chocolate. The word echoed in his mind. When did chocolate arrive in Europe? The 16th, maybe 17th century. Certainly not the 11th century. Dr. Stevens had already pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. After a few seconds, he looked up, his face pale. The girl's right. Cacao. And therefore, chocolate was only introduced to Europe after the expeditions to the New World, centuries after the alleged date of this document. A heavy silence fell over the room. Ryan felt his stomach churn. $200 million, 10 years of searching, and it was all crumbling because of a single word pointed out by a 4-year-old child. Dr. Clark shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. There must be an explanation. Perhaps it's a later addition, a marginal note from some scribe. These documents passed through many hands over the centuries. Then why didn't you notice it before? Ryan's voice was low, dangerously calm. 6 months of analysis, hired experts, and a 4-year-old girl finds a mistake that should have been obvious to any competent historian. Across the room, Yasmin had approached slowly, her steps hesitant. She kept her head down, trying to be invisible, but her eyes were fixed on Dr. Clark with an intensity that made her hands tremble. Sophia noticed her mother's approach and ran to her, clinging to her worn skirt. Ryan watched the interaction, noticing something strange in the way the janitor was looking at the expert. It wasn't just curiosity or fear that her daughter had caused trouble. It was something deeper. It was recognition mixed with dread. "You two know each other," Ryan said, not as a question, but as a statement. His business instincts, honed by years of dealing with liars and cheats, picked up on the tension between the two women. Yasmin opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She clutched Sophia to her, as if the child were a shield against what was to come. It was Dr. Clark who spoke, her voice now stripped of its arrogant confidence. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen this woman before in my life." "Liar!" The word escaped Yasmin in a hoarse whisper, years of silence breaking all at once. "You know exactly who I am, just like I know who you are." Ryan gestured to Dr. Stevens, who immediately positioned himself near the door, blocking any attempt to leave. Dr. Clark noticed the move, and her face grew even paler. "Margaret Clark isn't even your real name," Yasmin continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You were Margot Weissman. We worked together at the university. You were my colleague, my rival. You were the one who accused me of forging documents." The hall exploded with palpable tension. Ryan felt every muscle in his body tighten. Dr. Stevens was already typing furiously on his phone, likely trying to verify the information. Dr. Clark, or whoever she really was, took a step back. "This woman is delusional. She has no proof of what she's saying. She's just a desperate janitor trying to get attention." "You were jealous," Yasmin continued, ignoring the denials. "Jealous because I was younger, because my work was gaining recognition while yours was being ignored. So you planted evidence, forged emails, created a narrative that destroyed me. And when I fled, you simply took over my academic identity, piece by piece. Ryan looked at the document on the table, the word chocolate seeming to scream at him. You forged this parchment, he said, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. You created all of this, the grant charter, the analyses, everything. Not just that, Dr. Stevens interjected, his eyes still on his phone screen. There's a clause here in the contract, hidden among the technical addenda. A clause that, once triggered by the purchase of the document, would automatically transfer all rights to the land to a shell corporation registered in a tax haven. What's more, it would initiate an international arbitration process that would permanently extinguish any future claims the Vanderbilt family might have on these territories. Ryan felt the blood run cold in his veins. It wasn't just a fraud, it was an elaborate trap. A legal ambush disguised as historical restitution. If he had signed that contract, he would not only have lost $200 million, but also any chance of ever reclaiming his ancestral lands. Forever. Who's behind this? Ryan practically snarled the question, advancing on the woman who had nearly destroyed his life. Who hired you to do this? Dr. Clark backed away until she hit the wall, her face a poorly disguised mask of panic. I'm not saying anything without a lawyer present. You don't have the right to a lawyer here, Dr. Stevens said coldly. We haven't called the authorities yet, but we can do that now, if you'd prefer. Fraud, document forgery, attempted extortion. Those are serious charges. Sophia, still clinging to her mother, watched everything with wide eyes. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she sensed the shift in the air, the way the adults moved like pieces on a chessboard. Yasmin stroked her daughter's hair, her own eyes welling up. Years of suffering, of working in silence, of being invisible, all culminating in this moment. Her daughter, her little Sophia, had stopped someone else from being destroyed by the same woman who had ruined her life. The lands, Ryan said suddenly, connecting more pieces of the puzzle. There's something on that land besides historical value. What is it? Oil? Minerals? Dr. Stevens was back on his phone making quick calls. After a few minutes, he looked up with a grim expression. Natural gas. Massive reserves were discovered 6 months ago, but the information was kept under wraps. The land is worth billions, not millions. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. Billions! And he had almost handed it all over on a silver platter, almost signed his own ruin because of an obsession, because of a desire to right the wrongs of the past that had blinded him to the threats of the present. He looked at Sophia, at that small girl in a worn dress with immense eyes who had saved everything. A child who could barely read and write properly, but who had learned from her mother to see what others ignored, to pay attention to the details, to recognize the truth hidden beneath layers of well-constructed lies. "Thank you," Ryan said to Sophia, his voice softening for the first time that night. "You saved more than you can possibly imagine." Sophia just nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing from the man's voice that she had done something important, something that made her mother's tired smile a little less heavy, a little closer to real happiness. Dr. Clark remained pressed against the wall, her empire of lies crumbling around her. And as Dr. Stevens made more calls, as Ryan began to grasp the magnitude of what he had almost lost, a single certainty hung in the cold air of that winter night. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days following that night unfolded into a whirlwind of revelations and discoveries that left Ryan increasingly shocked by the depth of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed him. Dr. Stevens had hired private investigators, forensic accountants, and legitimate historical document experts. Every new report that landed on his desk revealed another layer of deceit, another carefully constructed lie. The woman who presented herself as Dr. Margaret Clark didn't even have a doctorate. Her real name was Margot Weissman, and she had been expelled from 3 different universities for unethical conduct before completely reinventing herself. The academic articles listed on her resume were all plagiarized from other people's work, including several of Yasmin's. The scientific journals where she had supposedly published didn't even exist. They were just well-designed websites created to lend credibility to a lie. Ryan spent sleepless nights in Dr. Stevens's office, surrounded by documents and evidence. Every page he read made him question how he had been so blind, so desperate for validation that he had ignored obvious signs. But the truth was more complex. The fraud had been meticulous, professional. Whoever was behind it had resources, connections, and a deep understanding of how to manipulate both the law and human emotions. Yasmin was called in to give her statement. She arrived at the office with Sophia, still wearing her janitor's uniform. She sat in the leather chair, her hands trembling as she held her daughter in her lap. "Tell us everything," Dr. Stevens requested. Yasmin took a deep breath. "We worked together at the National University in my country's capital. I was an assistant professor. She was a senior researcher. My work was getting attention. I was invited to a major conference. Margot had submitted a proposal, but it was rejected." She paused, wiping away a tear. Sophia squeezed her mother's hand. "After that, everything fell apart. Accusations of forgery surfaced. Emails appeared, supposedly from me. All fake, but convincing. The university launched an investigation. Before I could defend myself, the authorities showed up. Sophia was a baby. I couldn't leave her if they arrested me, so I ran." Ryan listened, in silence, his anger growing with every word. Margot hadn't just tried to destroy him. She had a history of ruining lives, of using her skills for personal gain, without a care for the consequences. "How did you survive all these years?" Ryan asked. "Jobs that didn't require papers. Cleaning, mostly. I changed my name, cut my hair, learned to be invisible. I got fake documents on the black market to have a place to live, to enroll Sophia in school. Every day was a risk, but it was better than going back and losing my daughter." Dr. Stevens took meticulous notes. "And you recognized Margot immediately that night at the museum?" Yasmin nodded. "Even with the different hair, with that whole respected intellectual act, I recognized her. The way she talked, her gestures. Some habits don't change. And when I saw the document on the table, when I heard Sophia point out the mistake, I knew. It was her style. Margot was always good at creating forgeries, but she was never good at actual history. She memorized facts but didn't understand context. That's why she'd make stupid mistakes like putting an anachronistic word in a medieval document." Dr. Stevens's investigators brought more disturbing information. The shell company that was set to acquire the land through the hidden clause in the contract was registered under several names, but they were all fronts. The true owner was someone Ryan knew well, someone close, very close. Marcus Vanderbilt, his cousin. Ryan felt the floor drop out from under him when he read the name on the report. Marcus. They had grown up together, competed in business, but had always maintained a respectful relationship, or so Ryan had thought. He knew about the natural gas, Dr. Stevens explained, pointing to bank records. There are records of payments to geological survey companies dating back 8 months. He found out before anyone else, and then he created this elaborate plan to take the land from you once and for all. Ryan closed his eyes, the betrayal cutting deeper than any financial loss ever could. Family, blood. And yet, Marcus had betrayed him for greed, hired Margot, created the fake document, planted the perfect bait, knowing Ryan would bite. He knew his cousin's obsession with restoring the family legacy. He used it as a weapon. Yasmin watched Ryan with an empathy that only someone who had been deeply betrayed could have. "It's worse when it comes from someone you trust," she said softly. "Betrayal from strangers hurts, but betrayal from someone you love destroys you." Ryan nodded, unable to speak. He had dedicated years to that dream, years chasing a shadow from the past while ignoring the dangers of the present, and he had almost lost everything for it. Sophia, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, doodling with a pencil on the table, suddenly asked, "Is the bad man going to jail?" The innocent question brought Ryan back to reality. He looked at the little girl who had saved everything with a simple observation, a child who understood the world in clear terms of right and wrong, without the complications adults created. "We're going to get justice," Ryan promised, and for the first time in days, his voice held true conviction. Somehow we're going to get justice. But getting justice wouldn't be simple. Marcus had powerful lawyers, political connections, endless resources. Dr. Stevens warned that a direct confrontation could drag on for years in court, costing millions with no guarantee of victory. Ryan spent the next night in his empty apartment, staring out the window, at the illuminated city. He thought of his grandfather, of the stories about the lost lands he had heard his whole childhood. He thought about how much time he had wasted chasing ghosts of the past. And he thought of Sophia, of Yasmin, of how two people invisible to society had been the only ones able to see through the lies. He looked at the photos on the bookshelf. His family, generations of Vanderbilts, looking back at him with silent expectation. For years, he had carried the weight of those gazes. But now, for the first time, he questioned if that obsession hadn't been a prison of his own making. His phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Dr. Stevens, his voice urgent. "We need to talk. Now. I found something on Marcus that changes everything." Ryan grabbed his coat and rushed out. As he drove through the deserted streets, a strange feeling washed over him. Fear mixed with hope, anger tempered with determination. When he arrived at Dr. Stevens's office, he found the lawyer surrounded by documents. But this time his face had a different expression. It was something close to triumph. "Marcus made a mistake," Dr. Stevens said, pushing papers across the desk. "A big one. And now we have exactly what we need to turn this game around." Ryan took the documents. They were bank records, wire transfers, legally intercepted emails. And as he read, a determined smile formed on his face. Marcus had been smart in creating the fraud, but he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated the greed of his own forger. Margot had kept copies of every conversation, every payment, every instruction, a personal insurance policy in case something went wrong. "She lawyered up yesterday," Dr. Stevens explained, "tried to cut a deal, said she had proof of who was behind it. Her lawyer contacted me. They're willing to testify in exchange for immunity." Ryan felt relief, mixed with disbelief. The solution was coming from the very person who had tried to destroy him. "But there's more," Dr. Stevens continued. "The investigators discovered Marcus wasn't alone. There are other family members involved." The revelation hit Ryan like a punch. "How many?" "At least 5 that we can confirm." Ryan sank into his chair. 5. 5 members of his own family willing to see him destroyed for greed. Dr. Stevens poured him a glass of water. "I know this is hard, but now we have the upper hand. We have the proof. We have the witness. We can sue them all, expose everything." Ryan took a sip, trying to process it all. "And Yasmin, Sophia." "Yasmin has agreed to testify about Margot. Her story confirms the pattern of fraud. And as for Sophia," Dr. Stevens hesitated, "that little girl saved you in a way no lawyer ever could." Ryan thought of the 4-year-old girl, her serious eyes, the way she had pointed to that word with such certainty. "I want to help them," Ryan said. "Yasmin and Sophia. I want to make sure they're taken care of." Dr. Stevens nodded. "We can include that in the deal. Witness protection, legal status for Yasmin, an education fund for Sophia." "No, not as part of a deal. As my choice. They deserve more than to be just witnesses. They deserve to have their lives back." For the first time in days, Dr. Stevens smiled. "That's the right call, Ryan." Ryan looked out the window. The sun was beginning to rise. A new day, and with it, the chance to do things differently. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, depositions, and revelations that delved ever deeper into the web of lies woven by Marcus and his accomplices. Ryan barely recognized his own life. The man he had been, obsessed with a glorious past and lost lands, seemed to have been left behind that night in the museum. Now he saw the world with different eyes, more attuned to the details that truly mattered. Margot, in exchange for partial immunity, gave up everything. Every email, every bank transfer, every order she had received from Marcus. The documents painted a grim picture of a conspiracy that had been years in the making. Marcus hadn't just discovered the natural gas on their ancestral lands. He had actively sabotaged all of Ryan's previous attempts to negotiate a purchase, creating false obstacles, spreading rumors about his cousin's financial instability, all to keep the land inaccessible until he could execute his plan. Ryan learned that 5 family members were involved. His uncle August, who had always treated him with fatherly affection, had invested $2 million in the scheme. His cousin Beatrice, with whom he had grown up playing, owned 15% of the shell company. Each name revealed was a new stab wound, deeper than the last. Yasmin became a key part of the case against Margot. Her story, documented with evidence she had secretly kept for years, showed a clear pattern of fraudulent behavior. Margot hadn't just destroyed Yasmin's career. There were other victims, other academics whose work had been stolen, whose reputations had been tarnished, a trail of destruction that stretched back a decade. Ryan insisted that Yasmin be properly protected. He hired immigration lawyers who worked day and night to regularize her status. After 8 years of living in the shadows, Yasmin finally had legal documents in her own name. She could walk down the street without fear of being deported. She could think about a future that wasn't just about survival. Sophia continued to go to school, but now without the weight of being the daughter of an undocumented immigrant. The other children still saw her as different, but at least her mother no longer had to lie about her identity at parent-teacher conferences. And on weekends, Ryan started visiting them at their small apartment, bringing books, school supplies, sometimes just to talk with Yasmin about history, about ancient documents, about the academic world she had lost. During one of these visits, while Sophia was drawing on the living room floor, Yasmin served tea and sat across from Ryan with a serious expression. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why are you helping us so much?" Ryan was silent for a moment, watching Sophia concentrate on her drawing. "Because you saved me, and because I realized I spent years chasing something that didn't matter while ignoring the real people who needed help." "The land matters to you," Yasmin said gently. "It's part of your family's history." "It mattered," Ryan corrected, "but now I understand that history isn't just in the past. It's in every choice we make in the present, and I'm choosing to do something that actually matters." Yasmin smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You know, for all those years cleaning floors, looking at ancient manuscripts through glass without being able to touch them, I thought my life was over, that I would never be a professor again, never do what I love. But Sophia taught me something. She taught me that we can teach and learn anywhere, under any circumstances." "Do you want to go back to teaching?" Ryan asked. "I do, but I don't know if it's possible. My credentials are from another country, another life." Ryan had already thought about this. He had already talked to Dr. Stevens about the possibilities. "What if we could restore your reputation, clear your name officially?" Yasmin looked at him in disbelief. "How? The accusation was filed in another country, under a different political regime." "Dr. Stevens has international contacts. With Margot's testimony, with the proof you've kept, we can reopen your case, prove you were wronged. It won't be fast, but it's possible." Yasmin covered her face with her hands, her body shaking. With silent sobs, years of pain, of injustice, of carrying the weight of a false accusation, all came pouring out in that moment. Sophia dropped her drawing and ran to her mother, hugging her tightly. "Don't cry, Mommy," Sophia said in her childish voice. "The good man will help." Ryan felt a lump in his throat. Good man, he didn't feel particularly good. He had been selfish, obsessed, blind. But maybe there was time to change. Maybe it was never too late to choose to be better. Meanwhile, the case against Marcus and the others moved forward. Dr. Stevens built a solid case based on fraud, forgery, and attempted extortion. The sums involved were large enough to guarantee severe penalties. But more than punishment, Ryan wanted justice. He wanted everyone to know the truth. Marcus tried to negotiate. He offered to return the invested money, to renounce any claim to the land, but Ryan refused. It wasn't about money or land. It was about principles. It was about showing that actions have consequences. The trial was set for 3 months later. The media began to cover the case, fascinated by the story of family betrayal and the unlikely role of a 4-year-old girl in unraveling it all. Reporters tried to interview Sophia, but Yasmin firmly turned them away. Her daughter would not be turned into a spectacle. Ryan used his influence to shield Yasmin and Sophia from excessive exposure. He hired security to ensure they could live normally while the case proceeded, and he began to think about the future, about how to use this experience for something constructive. One night, sitting alone in his apartment, Ryan had an idea that could transform all this pain into something positive, something that would honor Yasmin and all victims of academic fraud. He called Dr. Stevens, even though it was almost midnight. "I need to talk about a project, an institute." Dr. Stevens sighed. "Come in early tomorrow." But Ryan was already scribbling ideas on paper, an institute dedicated to verifying the authenticity of historical documents, a place where victims of academic fraud could find support. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. He felt hope. His life finally had real meaning. He decided that Yasmin would be the Institute's first academic director as soon as her name was cleared. She had the knowledge, and she understood what it meant to have the truth suppressed. Sophia would have a lifetime scholarship, and the Institute would be named after his grandmother, who had taught him about true nobility. The next day, he arrived at Dr. Stevens's office with a folder full of notes. As he explained his vision, the lawyer's expression shifted to something close to admiration. "You really want to do this," Dr. Stevens said. "I do. I have to. It's the only thing that makes sense. I'll help, but it will be a lot of work. Creating an institution like this takes time." "I have time, and I know exactly how I want to use it." When Yasmin arrived for another meeting about her case, Ryan invited her to join them. He explained his idea, watching her eyes fill with tears. "You want me to run this?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes. When your name is cleared, I want you to be the academic director. No one understands the importance of protecting the truth better than you." Yasmin just nodded, tears streaming freely. Sophia held her mother's hand tightly. "My mum is really smart," Sophia said. "She knows everything about old letters." Ryan smiled. "I know, and the whole world is going to know too." And in the small apartment across town, Yasmin put Sophia to bed, softly singing a lullaby in her native language. The little girl, tired from the day, closed her eyes with a smile on her face, and for the first time in her short life, Sophia slept without fear, without worrying about deportation, about sudden moves, about the constant sadness in her mother's eyes. She slept with the security of knowing there were good people in the world, people who saw beyond appearances, people who recognized the truth when they saw it, even when it came from the most unlikely sources. Yasmin watched her daughter sleep, stroking her hair. She thought of all the years of running, of fear, of working in silence. She thought of how she had taught Sophia to read ancient letters using books found in the trash, and she thought of how those lessons had changed everything. She remembered the night at the museum, the moment Sophia pointed out the error no one else had seen. She remembered the panic, the fear that her daughter would be ignored. But she also remembered the look in Ryan's eyes when he truly paid attention. Maybe the world could change, Yasmin thought. Maybe there was hope. And maybe her story didn't have to be defined by its worst moments, but by its best. She kissed Sophia's forehead and whispered, "You are braver than you know, my little one, and you're going to change the world one day. You've already started." The months leading up to the trial were marked by a series of revelations that made the case even more complex and disturbing. Marcus, realizing his lies were unraveling, attempted one last desperate maneuver. He hired the best lawyers in the country, men and women known for winning impossible cases through legal technicalities and jury manipulation. Dr. Stevens received Ryan in his office with a worried expression. "Marcus is claiming you're targeting him out of jealousy, that this whole accusation is just revenge because he was more successful in the family business. He's trying to play the victim." Ryan felt anger burn in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "We have the evidence. We have Margot's testimony. We have everything documented." "I know, but Marcus is convincing. He always has been, and he's using his position in the family to gain sympathy. He's already won the support of some of the older members, the ones who weren't directly involved in the scheme, but who believe his version of events." That hurt more than Ryan had expected. It wasn't just about Marcus. It was about how the entire family was fracturing, splitting into factions. Some believed Ryan, others believed Marcus. The family gatherings that were once occasions of unity were now silent battlefields, filled with accusatory glances and heavy silences. Aunt Marcia, his late father's sister, called Ryan on a cold night. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Ryan, please. Marcus is your cousin. You grew up together. Can't we settle this within the family? Does it really have to go to trial?" "Auntie, he tried to destroy me. He stole 200 million, forged documents, conspired to take the family's land. How can I just forget that?" "But it's family, Ryan, family." Ryan closed his eyes, the weight of that word crushing his chest. Family. His whole life, that word had meant loyalty, protection, unity. But now it was stained, twisted. Family had also meant betrayal, greed, lies. "Aunt Marcia, I love you. But I can't let this go. It's not just about me, it's about principles. It's about showing that no one is above the law, not even family." She cried on the phone, muffled sobs that tore at Ryan's heart. But he couldn't back down. He had already given in too much throughout his life, allowing his obsession with the past to blind him to the present. Now he had to be strong, even if it meant losing people he loved. Meanwhile, Yasmin was dealing with her own demons. The process to officially clear her name had begun, but it was slow and bureaucratic. Lawyers in her home country had to be contacted, old documents had to be recovered, witnesses located, and at every step, Margot tried to sabotage it. Even in custody, even with her freedom depending on her cooperation, Margot found ways to cause trouble. She leaked information to the press, twisting facts, trying to make Yasmin look as guilty as she was. Sensationalist news stories began to circulate, questioning whether Yasmin was truly innocent or if she was manipulating Ryan for personal gain. Sophia started getting bullied at school. Children, repeating what they heard from their parents, called her a liar, the daughter of a criminal. She would come home with her eyes red from crying, clutching torn drawings, unanswered questions stuck in her throat. Yasmin wanted to pull Sophia out of school, to protect her, to hide her from the cruel world. But Ryan convinced her that running wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he arranged a meeting with the school principal, brought Dr. Stevens and documents proving Yasmin's innocence, and explained the entire situation with clarity and firmness. The principal, a middle-aged woman with kind but tired eyes, listened to everything in silence. Then she sighed deeply. "I will speak with the parents. I will make it clear that bullying will not be tolerated, but I can't control what children hear at home." "I understand," Yasmin said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I just want my daughter to have a chance to be a child, to not carry the weight of accusations she doesn't even understand." Sophia, sitting next to her mother throughout the meeting, held a colored pencil and drew silently on a piece of paper. When the principal asked if she'd like to say anything, Sophia held up her drawing. It was a simple image, 2 figures holding hands, one large and one small with a smiling sun above them. "My mommy is good," Sophia said, her voice childish but determined. "She never lies. And I'm not a liar either." The principal took the drawing carefully, studying it as if it were a priceless work of art. "I believe you, Sophia, and I will do everything I can to make you feel safe here." But words, however well-intentioned, couldn't change reality. Sophia continued to suffer, silently, absorbing the childhood cruelty that is merely a reflection of adult cruelty. She stopped talking at school, remaining quiet during classes, isolating herself at recess. Ryan visited Yasmin and Sophia more frequently. He brought books, games, tried to make Sophia smile. On one of these visits, he found the girl sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers where she had written the same word dozens of times in different calligraphic styles. Truth. "What are you doing, little one?" Ryan asked, sitting down next to her on the floor. "Practicing," Sophia replied without looking up. "If I write truth a lot of times, will people believe it?" The question pierced Ryan like a blade, a 4-year-old child questioning if The truth was enough. Questioning if being honest mattered when the world seemed to punish honesty and reward lies. "People will believe it," Ryan said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "It might take time, it might be hard, but the truth always wins in the end. Always." Sophia finally looked up at him, her large eyes filled with a sadness no child should ever know. "Promise? I promise." It was a huge promise, perhaps an impossible one to keep. But Ryan made it anyway, because Sophia needed to believe in something. Because Yasmin needed to believe, and because he himself needed to believe that this whole fight was worth it. The trial approached, scheduled for 2 weeks away. Dr. Stevens worked day and night preparing the case, reviewing testimonies, organizing evidence. Margot had finally agreed to testify fully, providing details that not even Dr. Stevens knew. And each new detail made Marcus's betrayal even deeper, even more calculated. Ryan spent the nights before the trial revisiting memories. He and Marcus playing as children, Marcus being the best man at his wedding, Marcus standing beside him at his father's funeral. How had all of that turned into this betrayal? At what point had his cousin decided that money was worth more than blood ties? The night before the trial, Ryan couldn't sleep. He stood on his apartment balcony, watching the sleeping city, thinking about everything that was at stake. It wasn't just about legal justice. It was about his ability to trust again, to believe in family, to build something true from the wreckage of so many lies. His phone vibrated, a text from Yasmin. "We'll be there tomorrow. Sophia wants to come. She said she needs to see the truth win. I couldn't talk her out of it," Ryan typed, back quickly. "She's braver than most adults. See you tomorrow." And as the city began to wake, as the sun timidly rose on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, Ryan prepared to face the day that would change everything. The day when truth and lies would finally meet face to face, before a judge, a room full of people, and a broken family that might never be put back together in the same way. He thought of his grandfather, of the stories about the lost lands. He wondered what the old man would say about all this, about how an obsession with the past had nearly destroyed the future, about how a 4-year-old child had shown more wisdom than generations of Vanderbilts. Ryan put on his best suit, not out of vanity, but because he needed armor to face Marcus's gaze, to listen to the lies, to maintain his composure. Dr. Stevens met him at the courthouse entrance. The lawyer looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. This battle had taken its toll on him too. "Ready?" Dr. Stevens asked. "No," Ryan admitted, "but let's do this." Yasmin and Sophia arrived minutes later. Sophia held her mother's hand tightly, her eyes taking in everything with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan asked Yasmin. "Sophia is very young. A courtroom can be intimidating." "She insisted," Yasmin replied. "She said she needs to see that the truth matters. I can't deny her that." Sophia tugged on Ryan's sleeve. "It's going to be okay. The truth will win. You promised." Ryan knelt to her level. "I promised, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep it." "I know," Sophia said seriously. "That's why I'm here, to help you remember, in case you forget." Ryan silently swore he would do everything not to disappoint that faith. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, family members, curious onlookers drawn by the notoriety of the case. Ryan sat in the front row next to Dr. Stevens, feeling the weight of all those eyes on him. Across the aisle, Marcus looked impeccable in his Italian suit, his face a mask of confidence that Ryan knew so well. It was the same expression he wore in business meetings when he was about to close a major deal. The judge entered, a man in his late 60s with stark, white hair and a gaze that seemed to pierce through the most elaborate lies. Everyone rose in respect, the sound of scraping chairs echoing through the room. The trial began with opening statements. Marcus's lawyer, a bald man with gold-rimmed glasses and a melodious voice, painted a picture of Ryan as obsessed, irrational, driven by jealousy and resentment. According to him, Ryan couldn't accept that Marcus had prospered in business while he wasted time and money chasing lands that would never be recovered. The fraud accusation was just revenge disguised as justice. Dr. Stevens countered with facts, bank records, emails, recordings. Each piece of evidence was presented methodically and clearly. There was no unnecessary emotion in his words, just the raw, unvarnished truth. And the truth was devastating. Margot was called to testify on the second day. She entered the room under escort, her hair now short and lacking its former sheen. The time since her arrest had been cruel to her. She sat in the witness chair, avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Yasmin, who was seated 3 rows behind Ryan. Under oath, Margot confirmed everything. How Marcus had contacted her 2 years ago, how he had offered her a fortune to create the fake document, how he had provided every detail about Ryan's obsession, his family history, his vulnerabilities. She spoke in a monotone, emotionless voice, as if she were reading a grocery list instead of confessing to crimes that had ruined lives. "And why did you agree?" Dr. Stevens asked. "Money," Margot replied simply. "It was always about the money, and because I was good at it. Creating fake documents, assuming identities, destroying reputations. It was my talent." Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit her testimony, suggesting Margot was lying to get a more favorable deal. But when Dr. Stevens presented the emails between her and Marcus, the bank transfers, the recorded conversations, there was no room for denial. The evidence was irrefutable. Yasmin was called on the 3rd day. Ryan saw her hands trembling as she walked to the front of the room. Sophia had stayed with a social worker outside, as she was too young to watch her mother's testimony. Yasmin told her story, all of it. How Margot had destroyed her career, stolen her work, planted false evidence. How she had been forced to flee with a small child, to live as an invisible for years. Her voice broke several times, tears streaming freely, but she continued. She had to finish. She needed everyone to know. Marcus's lawyer was brutal in his cross-examination. He questioned why she had waited so long to come forward, why she never went to the police in her home country, why she ran if she was innocent. Each question was a stab, designed to make Yasmin look guilty, cowardly, deceitful. But Yasmin didn't waver. "I had a baby. I was alone in a country that had just had a political coup. There was no justice there, not for people like me, so I did what any mother would do. I protected my child. And when we got here, I lived in fear every single day that we would be deported, that we would lose the only security we had. I didn't report it because I was afraid. But that doesn't mean I was wrong. It means the world is cruel to those without power." The room fell silent. Even Marcus's lawyer seemed momentarily speechless. Yasmin stepped down from the witness stand with her head held high, returning to her seat where Sophia, brought back in by the social worker, was waiting for her. The little girl hugged her mother tightly, whispering something no one else could hear. Marcus was finally called to testify on the 4th day. He took the stand with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences in his life. He denied everything. He said the evidence was fabricated, that Margot was lying, that Ryan had orchestrated the whole thing out of revenge. His voice was firm, convincing. If you didn't know the facts, you might have believed him. But Dr. Stevens was prepared. He methodically destroyed every one of Marcus's claims. He showed emails with confirmed digital signatures. He presented evidence that Marcus had accessed the shell company's bank account. He brought in witnesses who confirmed meetings between Marcus and Margot. He left no room for doubt. The decisive moment came when Dr. Stevens asked, "Mr. Vanderbilt, were you aware of the natural gas reserves on the land?" Marcus hesitated. It was only a fraction of a second, but everyone in the room noticed. "No, I knew nothing about that." Dr. Stevens smiled. "Then how do you explain this email you sent to a geologist 8 months ago, requesting a specific soil analysis of that very region?" Marcus turned pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Dr. Stevens continued to present piece after piece of evidence, each one demolishing Marcus's defense. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand, Marcus was no longer confident. He was defeated, the weight of his lies finally crushing him. The lawyers made their closing statements. Marcus's tried to appeal to emotion, talking about family and forgiveness. Dr. Stevens spoke of justice, of consequences, of the importance of protecting the truth from those who would manipulate it for personal gain. The judge called for a recess to consider the verdict. The room slowly emptied, people whispering, speculating. Ryan remained seated, unable to move. Everything he had fought for over the past few months now depended on the decision of a man he didn't know. Yasmin sat beside him, Sophia between them. The little girl held Ryan's hand with one of hers, and her mother's with the other, as if she could unite them through her small presence. "It's going to be okay," Sophia said, repeating the words like a mantra. Ryan wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her, but the fear was real, palpable. What if Marcus won? What if this whole fight was for nothing? What if the lie beat the truth? Dr. Stevens placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "We did everything we could. Now it's up to the justice system. And if the justice system fails, then we'll keep fighting in other ways, in other venues, but we won't give up." The recess lasted 2 hours that felt like an eternity. Ryan tried to eat, but the food tasted like cardboard. Dr. Stevens made calls, but even his confidence seemed shaken. Yasmin kept Sophia distracted with drawings. When they were finally called back in, Ryan felt his legs weaken. This was it. Truth or lie, justice or betrayal. The room filled up again, reporters at the ready, family members divided. Ryan saw Aunt Marcia crying silently, her eyes red. The judge entered, his face unreadable. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and looked from one side to the other. And then, in a clear voice, he began to read. "After careful review of the evidence presented, I have reached the following conclusion." Ryan stopped breathing. "The evidence is conclusive. The bank records, the communications, the testimony of Miss Weissman, it all points to an elaborate conspiracy. Mr. Marcus Vanderbilt not only planned this fraud, but he also demonstrated a complete disregard for the truth. Therefore, I find him guilty of fraud, forgery, attempted extortion, and conspiracy." The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus sank in his chair. "As for the other parties involved, I order that they be investigated separately. And as for Ms. Weissman, while her plea agreement stands, she will face appropriate consequences." The judge paused, cleaning his glasses. "This case has had an impact on me, not because of the scale of the fraud, but because of what it reveals about how greed can corrode sacred bonds, and we also see how the truth can come from the most unlikely of sources." He looked toward Yasmin and Sophia. A 4-year-old child saw what experts missed. A mother held on to crucial evidence. This should teach us all a lesson in humility. Sophia gave a shy wave. He smiled before turning his attention back to Marcus. "Mr. Marcus Vanderbilt, you will be sentenced in 30 days. Until then, you will remain in custody. Your assets will be frozen. And may this case serve as an example that the truth eventually prevails." He banged the gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. It was over. The days following the verdict were a strange mix of relief and melancholy. Ryan had won in court, but the victory tasted bitter. His family was shattered. Marcus was in jail. 5 other family members were facing investigations. Aunt Marcia was no longer speaking to him. Cousins he had known since childhood avoided him in public, as if he were the villain for exposing the truth. Dr. Stevens tried to console him. "You did the right thing. The truth always comes at a cost, but the cost of a lie is always greater." Ryan wanted to believe him, but when he woke up alone in his empty apartment, when he looked at old photos of family parties where everyone was smiling, he questioned if the price hadn't been too high. It was Yasmin who brought him back to reality. She showed up at his apartment a week after the trial, bringing Sophia and a container of homemade food. "You're not eating," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I can see it in your eyes." Ryan tried to argue, but Yasmin wouldn't take no for an answer. She heated the food, served it on clean plates she found in his immaculate but empty kitchen, and sat across from him with Sophia at her side. "You're grieving for the family you lost," Yasmin said, as Ryan ate mechanically. "I understand, but you didn't lose family. You lost people who were willing to destroy you. That's not family. That's poison disguised as blood." "They were all I had," Ryan murmured. "No," Sophia interrupted, her voice childish but firm. "You have us now, we're your family." Ryan looked at the 4-year-old girl, at her big eyes filled with absolute sincerity. And something inside him broke. All the tears he had held back for months finally came, uncontrollable, shaking his body with sobs he didn't know he still had in him. Yasmin and Sophia hugged him. They said nothing, just stayed there. 3 people the world had tried to make invisible, now bound by something stronger than blood, bound by choice, by truth, by shared survival. When he finally stopped crying, Ryan felt different, lighter, as if he had been carrying a weight for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, "for not giving up on me." "Real families don't give up," Yasmin replied simply. In the months that followed, Ryan threw himself into the work of creating the Institute. It wasn't just a distraction, it was a purpose, it was redemption. It was his way of turning all that pain into something that could help others. The Institute for Historical Truth began to take shape. Ryan sold some of his properties to fund the initial structure. He hired architects, designers, and began recruiting legitimate academics to form the board. And at the center of it all was Yasmin. The process to officially clear her name took 8 months, but when it was finally completed, when the document arrived declaring her innocent of all charges, Yasmin cried for hours. 8 years of her life lived as a fugitive, as an invisible, as less than human. And now finally she could exist again. Ryan appointed her as the Institute's academic director. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to return to the academic world after so long away. But Ryan wouldn't accept her doubts. "You are the most qualified person I know, not just for your knowledge, but for your experience. You know what it means to have the truth stolen from you. That makes you perfect to protect the truth for others." The Institute opened its doors 1 year after the trial. The opening ceremony was simple but emotional. Academics from different countries attended. The media covered it extensively, and on stage during his inaugural speech, Ryan invited Sophia to join him. The girl, now 5, walked onto the stage with a confidence she hadn't had a year before. Ryan knelt beside her, adjusting the microphone to her height. "This young lady," Ryan said to the audience, "saw what all of us failed to see. She taught us that truth doesn't depend on age, education, or social standing. Truth is truth, and anyone, no matter how small, can be its guardian." The audience applauded. Sophia, instead of being shy, beamed. It was the smile of someone who finally understood her own worth, who knew her voice mattered. But it wasn't all celebration. Marcus had been sentenced to 10 years. The other family members involved received lesser sentences, deals that Dr. Stevens had negotiated in exchange for their cooperation. Margot was serving 5 years in a women's prison, and Ryan still struggled with the loss. There were nights he would look at old photos and miss what the family had been, or what he thought it had been. There were days he would drive past Aunt Marcia's house and have to resist the urge to stop, to try to explain, to seek forgiveness for exposing truths no one wanted to see. Dr. Stevens remained his lawyer, but more than that, he had become a friend. One of the few who had stood by him when everything fell apart. "You saved more than, your money," Dr. Stevens said during one of their regular meetings. "You saved your integrity, and that's worth more than any inheritance." Ryan was beginning to understand that. Slowly, painfully, but he was beginning to understand. The family he thought he had was an illusion, but the family he was building choice by choice, act by act, was real. It was Yasmin who challenged him when he was wrong. It was Sophia who made him smile with her innocent observations. It was Dr. Stevens who never gave up even when it seemed impossible. It was this chosen family that mattered. One afternoon, 6 months after the Institute's opening, Ryan took Yasmin and Sophia to visit the ancestral lands. Not the lands Marcus had tried to steal, but the original lands, the ones that had been sold generations ago out of necessity, not betrayal. They walked through the rolling fields now owned by another family who farmed them with care. The landscape was beautiful, serene, exactly as his grandfather had described in his stories. Sophia ran ahead, chasing yellow butterflies, her crystal-clear laugh echoing in the clean afternoon air. Was it worth it? Yasmin asked as they watched Sophia play. The obsession? Ryan reflected, thinking carefully before answering. No. The obsession nearly destroyed me. It almost made me lose everything that truly matters. But what came from it? The path that led me to you. What I learned about truth and family, about what really has value in life, that was worth every moment of pain, every sleepless night, every tear shed. Do you still think about them? The lands? I do. It would be a lie to say I don't. But not like before. Before, they represented everything I had lost, everything I needed to get back to be whole. My grandfather taught me that our history was buried in this soil, and for years I believed that without this land, I had no history. Now, they're just land. Beautiful, historic, full of memories, but just land. My true inheritance isn't in the ground beneath my feet. It's in the choices I make every day, the people I choose to love, the truth I choose to defend. Yasmin smiled, taking his hand and lacing her fingers through his. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. It meant acceptance, it meant trust, it meant he wasn't alone on this journey. It meant that finally, after all those years chasing ghosts of the past and trying to restore glories that perhaps never existed in the way he imagined, he had found something real, something solid, something that couldn't be stolen or forged. Sophia came running back, her small sneakers pattering on the dirt path, holding a purple wildflower she had picked with care. For you, she said breathlessly, handing the flower to Ryan with the seriousness of someone offering a priceless treasure. Because you're my hero. Ryan took the flower delicately, as if it were made of glass, feeling tears burn, his eyes again. But this time they were different from the tears he had shed so many times over the past months. They were good tears, tears of deep gratitude, tears of someone who finally understood what really mattered in life. No, he said, his voice thick, kneeling to be at Sophia's level. You're my hero. You and your mom saved me when I was blind. You saved my life, my soul, my future. You taught me that family isn't about blood or land. It's about the people who choose to stand by your side. Sophia hugged him, her small body radiating warmth and life. And in that moment, standing on that ancestral land surrounded by the two people who had become his true family, Ryan finally felt at peace, finally felt whole, finally felt at home. The sun began to set, painting the sky gold, and the three of them walked back, hand in hand, ready for the life they were building together. 2 years after that afternoon on the ancestral lands, the Institute for Historical Truth had become an international benchmark. Academics from around the world sent documents for verification. Victims of academic fraud found support and resources to clear their names. And at the heart of it all, Yasmin worked tirelessly, her passion for truth and justice inspiring the entire team. Ryan had sold most of his businesses to dedicate himself fully to the Institute. He discovered that building something meaningful brought more satisfaction than any financial transaction ever had. Every verified document, every restored reputation, every protected truth was a victory worth more than millions. Sophia, now 6, attended a private school where she was finally accepted and respected. But she never forgot where she came from, her mother's struggle, the small apartment where they had lived. Once a month she insisted on visiting children's shelters, bringing books and telling stories about the importance of paying attention to details. My mom taught me that the truth is in the little things, Sophia would tell the other children, her voice serious but gentle. One wrong word can change everything. That's why we always have to look carefully. The children listened to her, fascinated, and Yasmin, watching from a distance, felt immense pride in the person her daughter was becoming, not just smart but compassionate, not just observant but empathetic. The Marcus case had changed legislation. Stricter. Laws on the verification of historical documents were passed, penalties for academic fraud were increased, and the Vanderbilt name, once synonymous with obsession and family tragedy, was now associated with integrity and the protection of truth. Marcus was serving his sentence in silence. Ryan visited him once 6 months after the sentencing, not for forgiveness but for closure. He needed to look his cousin in the eye and understand how they had reached that point. "Why?" Ryan asked through the glass of the visiting room. "We were family. We grew up together. Why betray me like that?" Marcus was silent. For a long time his face aged by months in prison. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of the arrogance that had always characterized him. Jealousy, pure and simple jealousy. You had the obsession, the focus, the determination. I just had empty ambition. You were chasing something you believed was important. I was just chasing money. And the more you talked about the land, about restoring the family legacy, the more I hated you for having something to fight for. So I decided to take it from you. I decided to turn your passion to my advantage. And, was it worth it? Ryan asked, echoing the question Yasmin had asked him years before. No. Marcus finally looked directly at Ryan. I destroyed our family. I destroyed myself. And for what? Money I'll never use. Land I'll never own. All I have now is time to think about what could have been if I had chosen differently. Ryan nodded slowly. I hope you find peace with your choices, Marcus. But I can't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe never. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you'll be happy, that you'll build something better than what we destroyed. It was the last time they spoke. But that conversation brought the closure Ryan needed. There was no more consuming anger, just a sadness for what could have been and gratitude for what now was. Aunt Marcia eventually reached out to Ryan. It took almost 2 years, but she appeared at the institute on a rainy afternoon, carrying an old umbrella and with tears in her eyes. I should have believed you, she said, without preamble. I should have seen what Marcus was doing. But I chose the comfortable illusion that family was always good, always honest. And in doing so, I failed you. Ryan hugged her, feeling decades of shared affection in that gesture. Family is complicated. You didn't fail. You just believed in the best version of people. It's not your fault they didn't live up to it. Can I meet your new family? Aunt Marcia asked shyly. Ryan smiled. They're going to love you. And they did. Yasmin and Aunt Marcia connected immediately, both strong women who had faced loss and moved forward. Sophia gained a grandmother of the heart, who spoiled her with sweets and stories. And Ryan got back a piece of the family he thought he had lost forever. The institute grew. They opened branches in 3 countries. They trained hundreds of experts in fraud detection. They saved countless reputations, protected genuine historical documents, and exposed elaborate forgeries. And in every case, Yasmin reminded her team of what truly mattered. It's not just about documents, she would say in their monthly meetings. It's about people, about lives that can be destroyed by lies. Our mission is to protect not just history, but humanity. On the night of the Institute's anniversary, 3 years after its founding, Ryan gave a speech to a packed room of academics, donors, and staff. When I began this journey, I was obsessed with the past. I thought my history lay in lost lands, in ancient documents, in the glories of generations I never knew. But a 4-year-old girl taught me something that no academic, no expert, no advisor ever could. She taught me that truth has no age, that careful observation is worth more than fake credentials, that sometimes the people most invisible to the world are the ones who see most clearly. He looked to where Yasmin and Sophia were sitting in the front row. Sophia wore a beautiful blue dress, her hair in elaborate braids that Yasmin had lovingly done. She was smiling, that bright smile that lit up any room. Sophia saved me that night in the museum, but more than that, she and Yasmin taught me what family truly means. It's not about blood, it's about choice. It's about the people who stand by you even when everything falls apart. It's about building something true from the ruins of lies. The audience applauded warmly, but Ryan wasn't finished. And that is why today I am announcing the creation of the Sophia Program for Young Observers, a program dedicated to teaching children, especially those from marginalized communities. The art of critical observation, fact-checking, and analytical thinking. Because if one 4-year-old girl could see what experts missed, imagine what thousands of children, properly trained and valued, could do. The room erupted in applause. Sophia stood up, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Yasmin hugged her, her own vision blurry. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, and only Ryan, Yasmin, and Sophia remained in the now empty hall, they sat together on the floor, exhausted but happy. "Do you think my grandfather would be proud?" Ryan asked suddenly. Yasmin thought for a moment. "I don't know about the land, but he would be proud of the man you've become, of what you've built, of the family you've chosen." Sophia snuggled between them, holding a hand of each. "We're a real family now, right?" "We always were," Ryan answered, kissing the top of her head. "It just took me a while to see it." They sat there, the three of them, in a comfortable silence. Outside, the city continued its frantic pace. But in there, in that moment, there was only peace. Peace won through struggle, maintained through truth, and cemented through chosen love. Ryan thought about everything he had been through, the night in the museum when his world almost collapsed, the trial that exposed family wounds, the lonely nights questioning if he had made the right choices. And now, looking at Yasmin and Sophia, he knew with absolute certainty that he had. Every tear, every moment of pain, every difficult decision had led to this moment of perfect peace. "You know," Yasmin said, breaking the silence, "when I fled my country with Sophia as a baby, I thought my life was over, that I would never be anything, but invisible, that I would never make a difference in the world." "And now?" Ryan asked gently. "Now I know that sometimes we have to lose everything to find what truly matters. We have to be invisible to learn to see clearly. We have to suffer to understand compassion." Sophia yawned, her small body relaxing between the two adults. "I'm sleepy," she murmured. "Let's go home," Ryan said, getting up and holding out a hand to help Yasmin. And as they finally stood to go home, to the spacious apartment they now shared as a real family, so different from that first small, cold apartment where Yasmin had raised Sophia alone for years, Ryan looked back one last time, at the institute that represented not just his redemption, but his complete transformation, at the space that proved that from deep pain and devastating betrayal, something genuinely beautiful could be born. Truth had won. Family had been redefined, and Ryan was finally at peace with his past, present in his present, and hopeful for his future. And beside him, always, would be the two people who showed him that sometimes the greatest truths come from the most unexpected places, that heroines can be just 4 years old and wear worn-out dresses. That family isn't who shares your blood, but who chooses to share your journey. As they walked to the car under the bright stars of that perfect night, Sophia held tightly to Ryan's and Yasmin's hands, uniting them as she always did. And in that simple gesture was everything that truly mattered: love, truth, family, choice.